to activate it. Once it's activated, let's give it a moment here. Selecting debug, of course. And I'll refresh here to see if it's activated. So once it's activated, you'll notice that now there's not a run option because run is only for REST-based interfaces. When it's a SOAP-based interface, instead you get this little run details box. And from there you get this metadata URL. Now I'm going to leave this handy for a moment because I'm going to copy and paste from there later. You could just save it to a notepad or something to save it. But this is actually the concrete WSDL. I'm just going to open that in a new tab to show you what it looks like. This is going to be now the WSDL that we would give to our SOAP clients, which includes the location of the location address of our SOAP web service. This same information is going to be used for our SOAP client here in just a moment. So let's move on down to step 8 where we launch the SOAP UI application. It's launched, and the way this tool works is I can go in to create a new SOAP project, and I'm going to paste in that URL for the WSDL, and we recommend giving it a meaningful name. We're going to call it OIC Lab 5. What it does is introspect the WSDL, and then notice what it has. It has a greeting and a request, and when we double click that and look into it, it now shows us the SOAP envelope of what needs to be going for the client. So theoretically now you just simply put in a number like 145 according to our lab instructions, and you'll notice step 13 says go ahead and click submit the request, and it's going to fail. Well, why is it going to fail? Well, it's going to fail because essentially we made a request but we didn't provide any credentials, right? So as we made this request, I got an unauthorized response. Authentication is not going to be any good. So we provide instructions how it works in SOAP UI. Let me expand this a little bit bigger. So you can see down here at the bottom, there's an auth tab. So we walk you through this in the lab instructions. We want to go and we want to add credentials. Again, any service invoker credentials will work. We're going to use our service credentials because we have access to this instance. So we add new authorization. It's going to be basic authentication, and this is where we provide the username and password. So you may recall I showed you this earlier. Let me open up my tab here to get my credentials, which I'm not going to share directly with you, but you can get an idea of. My username doesn't matter. Actually, none of it matters because it's going to be gone by the time you watch this video. Here we go, and I'm going to paste in my credentials. These are the same credentials to access the OIC environment. Now, once we have that in place, what we do up here is we paste that in, right-click, add WSS username token as password text, and then it gets pushed up here for my credentials and my password accordingly. Now, according to the lab instructions, I'm ready to do another test that should work this time. So I click on that request button with that same value of 145. This time I get back an OK, and if I click over here at XML, I can see the format shows that the number I put in is put out to text. So under the covers, what happened? We called our integration. Our integration called that external SOAP service, who we got the response, and we mapped that back to the client. And as always, we'd like to always make maybe one more request just for fun. I'm just going to come up with a number 789. Click request. Go back to the XML tab, and I can see 789 right there. So let's return now to our console. And I can move that out of our way. And what we want to do now to observe this is go to our observe button up here. All right. Since we made 2 requests, we should be able to see them here within the last hour. It's actually we made 3, didn't we? We had a failed one. So it shows all 3 of them here. And in the lab instructions, we tell you to go to the instances page. That's one easiest way to find it. I can see essentially now everything that's been returned in the last hour. Of course, I'm only interested in what we did from our this particular lab, the convert number to text one, not the previous lab from before that. So notice on that first request, the primary identifier is undefined because indeed it was undefined. When you click on that, I'll notice right here for the trigger, there was an error processing the response because yes, there was an authentication error, just what we would have expected from a troubleshooting perspective. But if I click on one of the other ones, let's do that last one I just did, I can see everything's down here in green. I can see the message that we sent out to that external service. Um, to send it outbound. I could also see the message that we received as a response back from that service, and of course then all the other details that you need to for troubleshooting and working through it. The lab instructions give you encouragement to kind of look around a little more of these. You can do that if you do this hands-on yourself, but you get the idea of how you can do troubleshooting and monitoring of integrations, to include those that have errored out like you see here. All right, finally, to wrap things up in step 32, we're reminded that it's time to go and deactivate our integration since we don't need it anymore right now. So I'll click on deactivate. Indeed. And we refresh the page to see that it's back to the configured status. As a reminder, if you ever want to, if you're into your lab environment and want to activate these again and do additional testing or other use cases, you can certainly do that. So let's wrap things up. We created a SOAP trigger this time using an abstract WSDL. We created an integration to with the connection to that external SOAP service, did all the data mapping, and we used, in this case, SOAP UI as our third-party SOAP client to do our testing. This concludes Lab 5. Welcome to the overview for Lab 6, creating a synchronous trigger SaaS to SaaS integration. So in this particular set of lab practices, there's 5 of them as we'll walk through these various tasks. We involve this time the Oracle CX Sales and B2B Service Cloud as a client, and so therefore the trigger will be that same connection we did in the previous lab exercise, Lab 5, where we're setting up a use case that allows them to retrieve a list of business objects, these right now incidents, that are related to one of their accounts. And so the target this time will be another Oracle application, Oracle Service Cloud, formerly known as Right Now. And so to undo a little bit of the confusion, since Oracle Service Cloud has the initials of OSC. In this context, it will be OSC. Unfortunately, sometimes this CX Sales Cloud has the same initials, OSC, because it used to be called Oracle Sales Cloud. So just try not to get confused with that. So anyway, in the logic of this particular lab exercise, our goal then is to create the new connection, of course, invoke role to the right now application, reuse the connection that we've already created for the CX Sales Cloud, and then we'll just simply implement the logic to see how it works with this particular application as well as the appropriate mapping. The other thing that will be interesting too that you already have some experience with is for testing purposes, since technically this is going to be a SOAP-based interface. Now we're not using a SOAP adapter, we're using the trigger, the CX Sales Cloud application adapter, but the testing will be done the same way because these are SOAP-based messages. A bit of a note then on the prerequisites. In addition to having completed Lab 1, because of what's involved here, Lab 4 and 5 must have been completed in order for you to try these yourself. We'll see you in the next video. Okay, let's start this lab with practice 6-1, where first thing we're going to do is create the connection based upon the Oracle Service Cloud Right Now adapter. And as mentioned here, this is going to be only done in the invoke role because none of our lab practices in our project will need to use it as a trigger, so invoke only. So the very first task we're going to do is locate now the credentials for Right Now, and the steps here explain how to do that. Again, as a quick demonstration, I don't have a lab tab, but I have something very similar to what you're going to see when you do the hands-on. Again, below the Fusion credentials location towards the bottom, you'll see the Right Now URL, which we're going to need, and also the Right Now credentials that you'll use when you create a connection. So I'll get started on the steps beginning in step 2. I'll move this out of the way and let's get started. First thing we want to do is go to our projects page and open our project. And then over here on the connections page, it's time to create another connection. We're asked to search for right. In fact, just typing right is enough to get me there for the Oracle Service Cloud. And we want to call it Oracle Right Now. And this will just be the invoke role. And we click Create. Now, when we get to the properties page, we need that WSDL URL. I just showed you that a moment ago. I'm going to copy and paste that in here, which is what's needed for right now. As you can see, there's really only one security policy. There's no options here. We just need to provide the appropriate username and password. Let me type that in. And I'll verify it. Yes, that looks good. Let's click on Test. I'll dismiss the banner, and now I can click on Save. All right. Well, with the connection now in a configured state, we can be prepared now to move on to the next practice. We'll see you in the next video. All right, for practice 6-2, we're going to move ahead with this lab, and we're going to essentially create our integration from scratch once again, this time configuring the trigger based upon that CX sales application connection that we had provided earlier. So as always, I'll be following through the steps. I encourage you to do the same as I walk through these tasks. The first one is to create the new integration. We click on the plus icon, click Create. We're going to use the application pattern once again. And for the name of the integration, we're asked to call it this, OIC Incidents for CX Sales. Click Create. And now it asks us, of course, to select a trigger. Well, we're going to reuse that Oracle CRM connection, which is the CX Sales Cloud. We need to name the endpoint. We're asked in the lab exercise on step 7 to call it get incidents. Now on this page here, we have an opportunity to either configure the request leveraging business events or leveraging business objects. In this case, the use case is to use a business object, specifically the account object. So we select that and click Continue. And it takes a little bit of while to pull in the information that's needed for configuring the response, as it makes a design time connection to Oracle Service Cloud. All right, so now it's time to select which business object we want for the response. In this particular case, we're looking for a custom business object called incident. Now, again, I could scroll through looking for it, but you can always type it in. And in fact, I found it already. And if you'll notice in the description, it indicates, well, this is a custom business object that's part of that application added for CX Sales Cloud, so it knows what to expect. And once it processes that information, it should advance us to the summary page. And this is something that you might see then when you configure a configuration such as this. We see the request object that we selected, the response object selected. It's always good to review to see if you've got your configuration correct. So once I click Finish, I'm returned to my design canvas, and as always, because this is a synchronous request response integration, there's the mapper action ready to be configured once we're done with the implementation of our integration. I'll click on Save, dismiss the banner, and as always, we need to configure a business identifier. So beginning in step 14, it asks us to do that now. And for this field, we're going to take from that account object that's being passed in, we're expecting the client to populate at the very least the party ID, which will kind of correspond to an account ID. And we'll leave there the name as party ID. I'll click away from that. And then click Save to save our integration so far. Dismiss the banner. And we'll go ahead and exit from the design canvas back to the project page, to where we can see that the new integration is now at least partially configured. We'll see you in the next video. All right, moving forward to practice 6-3. Now we're going to configure that right now connection, obviously as an invoke, and set it up for retrieving those incident business objects. What will be unique here is with the Oracle Service Cloud right now, it uses a unique query language, a proprietary query language called right now object query language, and we'll show you how to write one of those statements for this particular use case. So again, as always, I'm going to ask for you to just follow along as I do the tasks. Starting with task 1, we're going to open the integration back up again for editing. And then once we're in our design canvas, just below the trigger, we locate that add action, and we're going to do an invoke on the Oracle Right Now connection. All right, step 4 in our exercise asks us to define the endpoint as get incidents for org, standing for organization. We click continue. So when we get to the configure operations page, as you can see, we can either select a single operation, or this actually provides the ability to do batches of operations where I can click here to add one or more. In this scenario, we just need a single request, and we have three choices, either to do a CRUD operation, create, update, delete, so forth, or a file attachment. And in this case, it's going to be the right now object query language. And following the lab instructions, we're going to, of course, go in here and choose query objects instead of CSV query. And then this is where we paste in or write out the syntax for the query language. Now, fortunately, in our lab exercise, step 9 shows us what that query statement should be. I'm just simply going to copy and paste that into here. And now that I have that in place, let me move this out of our way. We're saying, well, we need to do a test. Well, in order to do that, we refresh to get the parameter bindings. In this case was the org ID, and we're going to set that to be 5. And we can leave this blank and click on test my query. And if the query is valid, we should get back, in this case, a list of incidents, which we do associated with that organization ID number 5. So let's continue on by clicking the continue button, which takes us to our summary page, and now we can click finish. And as always, now that the invoke is configured, a new map action is created to allow us for mapping the parameter values that need to go into this request. I'll click on save. And moving to step 16, we open the map for editing. So the source that came in from the client, in this case CX Sales B2B Service Cloud, it's going to send in an account object, so we have that expanded. And in our target section, we only are interested in that query parameter that we just define, org ID. So for the mapping, the lab exercise asks us to go ahead and just simply map the party ID, which will map to the organization ID over in Right Now. We click on Validate, dismiss the banner, and I click here to go back to the design canvas, and I can click on Save, and this completes the practice. We'll see you in the next video. We'll continue now with practice 6.4, and essentially we'll focus on implementing the response mapping based upon what we've done so far. Again, I'll have you follow along as I start with task number 1. It asks us to go to our mapper for get incidents mapping, which is here at the bottom. Again, an unimplemented mapper will be surrounded typically by these dotted lines. But again, you can, even one that's been configured, you can always double click into open the map editor and maybe try to improve the mapping or fix the mapping if something was wrong. So you can always enter and exit a mapper at any time, but in this case, since it hadn't been configured yet, it looks in a slightly different state. When we click on edit, in this case we're looking to get the incident that is going to be needed here as our response back to our client, which is the CX Sales Cloud. And to get that incident information, we're going to get that from the response. So we expand this, we expand the query object's response, and notice it has an incident with 2 sequences. So in this particular case, we were going to drag the incident node itself, notice a repeating node, over to this incident at the top. And what this does is automatically create a for each loop. And I'll show you what that looks like. The lab instructions talk about this, but if I click on XSLT up here above, I can now see what it actually created, a for each loop for each incident with that information underneath as we map data from whatever the source or source is in this case. So I'm going to close that, so you can kind of see what is going to be involved here. It kind of keeps it a little bit simpler. And if I move down to step 5 under sources, when we expand incident and the first sequence node, we'll see this ID node, which has an ID element. That now needs to be mapped over to the target ID element. And from here, I'm just following the instructions along the way as to the values that need to be brought across. In this case, the lookup name is going to come across here to the record name. The created time is going to come over to the creation date, and the updated time is going to come over to the last update date element. Again, we have a screenshot of what the mapping should look like. I've double checked that. Looks like I got my mappings correctly. And we make a note here about, from an expediency standpoint, we're not mapping all the other data into this object, even though we retrieved more data. We're just kind of simplifying and speeding up the process so you can get the implementation in place. So I'm clicking on Validate, close the banner, close the mapper. As always, saving the integration. And we can click the go back arrow to return to the project page. See you in the next video. All right, practice 6-5, our last one for this lab, where we're going to activate our integration and, of course, test it. Very similar to what we did in lab 5 when we had a SOAP client. Since this is also technically a SOAP client, we're going to be using SOAP UI for our testing, but as a reminder, you can use any SOAP client testing tool that you're comfortable using. So let's follow the instructions starting here. If you follow along with me. On the integration panel, we're going to go through and activate our integration. Make sure it's in debug mode where it is. Close the banner, and we want to update this activation in progress by clicking the refresh icon. It's still in progress. I'll give it a couple seconds and try again. And it's now active. All right, so now, just like we had with the SOAP adapter, if you'll notice, there's a Run Details option. When we click on that, once again, there's going to be a metadata URL, which corresponds, in this case, again, to another concrete WSDL that we ended up generating as a result of making this configuration for our Oracle CX Cloud client. And I'll hold on to that here because at this point we need to go back to do our testing to launch the SOAP UI application. Step 8, I'm going to open up my SOAP UI, kind of where I left off before. So I'm going to go ahead and close that one and minimize that in my projects. And we're going to do similar to what we did before. We're going to create a new SOAP project, and we need that endpoint one more time. So let me grab that. I'll copy that and place it here. And the lab instructions instruct me to give it a meaningful name. We're going to call it OIC Lab 6. And just as before, it introspects the WSDL. In this case, we expand out the request one page. Well, let me make this full page, and now we can actually see then what the request can send. We can provide values for any of these things. Right now they're all just set to defaults or question marks, and you can see the account object is rather big. There's a lot of information to populate. Now for our testing purposes, we just need a few fields to make this work. So we're going to update step 12, the party ID, by replacing that with the number 5. That should work because that's a valid organization ID. And then that's really all we need to kind of get us started. We're going to go ahead and click the authorization tab as we learned to before, where I can now define basic authentication. I need a username and password. Let me paste that in here. And as before, we simply right-click into here to add the username password token, and it gets added to our request. All right, with that done, we should be able to do a test. Let's see if it works. Clicking step 18, clicking the execute button. And sure enough, I get a 200 OK response with a whole bunch of records, or incidents, I should say, coming back. If I want to look at an XML format, it might look a little bit nicer to me. But again, there's a whole lot of incidents associated with that particular organization ID. And we can try some other tests. The lab instructions give us some other valid party IDs, like one. Let's send another request. And I get another list of incidents. Let's do just one more. Let's change it to party ID of 2. And execute another request. Excellent. And it also says you can try an invalid value just to see what happens. And this is kind of important to understand when you do a specific kind of error handling or not. In this case, I could put a party ID of 20, which is invalid, but the way the logic of our call to there is just it doesn't really provide much information other than the fact that it's empty. So it made the request, and the list of incidents is 0, which is not really an error. It's just a 0 list of incidents. If we wanted to implement logic to say if there's not at least one incident, throw an error, we could have done that, but this is perfectly legitimate for this use case. So what we want to do is go, and I'll minimize this, and click cancel out here. Let's go over to the observe page to take a look now at what happened with our, in this case, 4 requests that all were successful and parsed. So I can go into the Instances tab to look at any one of them specifically. So at this point, we would just be troubleshooting or just kind of viewing what happened. Let's just choose one of these here, party ID number 2. I can see the path the integration took, and then I can look specifically on the messages that were sent to right now. I can also see the information that was sent as a response. Oops, I can't look at it directly here because the payload requires me to download it. But you can kind of see here that each one of these allows me to see along each step along the way what the data was coming in, and of course obviously the final reply, which is what we saw in our test client. All right, we'll close that by hitting the back arrow. And to wrap things up for this lab, beginning in step 28, they ask us to go back here and deactivate the integration, which I'll do here, and confirm the deactivation, close the banner, and that takes us to the end, where essentially what we did is we went through a use case where we're providing an interface for one SaaS application, in this case Oracle CX Sales Cloud, to invoke an asynchronous request to Service Cloud via the OIC integration. That completes Lab 6. Welcome now to the overview for Lab 7, creating an integration to access an Oracle Autonomous Database. So in this particular lab set of practices, and we have 6 of them there's actually quite a bit to configure. Now the main focus is on accessing a database and creating that connection and then using it within the integration. But to complete a more extensive use case, we're also going to invoke another external REST application, REST countries, to retrieve some data. And so the overall design of this is we set up a REST trigger, we're using the one we had before, that sets up a simple opportunity for a REST client to say, I need information about a country. I'll give you the country ID that have available to me. We retrieve that information and invoke to the database to get back a specific country code that corresponds with that country ID. Then we can call the REST countries API, getting the information about that country, and then map the data from there to a more simple JSON response object that's needed by the REST client. So in order to build this, we're going to reuse that REST trigger connection that we did originally way back in Lab 1, but then we're also going to create a brand new connection to the REST, both to REST countries, REST API, as well as the Oracle ATP database. And the only prerequisite really involved here is that you have successfully completed Lab 1. So let's get started. We'll see you in the next video. So we start with practice 7-1, where we're going to create the new integration as designed here and specified. And while we're at it, we'll configure the REST trigger. So follow along with me as I go through the tasks. First task is to access our project again, if it's not already open. Click the plus icon and create, and the application pattern to create a new integration. Now, on step 5, they gave us a name they want us to use, retrieve country information, and we click create. And as always, the first thing we do is select the trigger. We're going to reuse that same REST trigger again, but obviously on the configure basic info page, we're going to give it a unique name. Click continue. And we need a relative URI. So we're going to use this very simple relative URI of country, providing a template parameter called ID. Once again, selecting the get operation, and we need to select here to make sure we can configure the endpoint to receive the response. We click on continue, and as typical, we want to review the page to see if we need to add any query parameters, which we don't, but we are going to change the template parameter to, instead of being a string, we're going to think that a integer is more appropriate for that. So according to the lab instructions, that's what we need to do. We click on continue, and now we're ready to configure the response. So as typical, we're going to use a JSON sample. And once again, we're going to now locate within the resources folder this retrieve country information response JSON file. There it is. I'll select that. And typically we'd like to kind of see what we're planning to return to the client. Again, you could have built this yourself. We just wanted to save you time. We decided that this key bit of information is what the client might want. So we click cancel out of that and click continue, which takes me all the way to the summary page where we can review the endpoint information and click finish, which now returns us to our design canvas. As always, this automatically, since it's a request response pattern, it's going to set up a mapper for us to return the response back to the client, but we're not ready to do that yet because we don't have any data to respond with. As always, beginning in step 25, we encourage you, this is a good time to go ahead and configure the business identifier. In this case, we'll use that ID that's passed in the template parameter for the business identifier field. And for better clarity, we're going to go ahead and just change the display name to be something more interesting, this will be country ID. I'll click away from here and click Save to save our integration. And we can use the go back arrow to return to our project page. And it's now listed here in a configured state. We'll see you in the next video. All right, here we're at practice 7-2. It's now time to create an invoke role connection to call that external REST application to get the country information. So we'll follow the steps to create a new connection. On the connections pane, step 1, we're going to now search for the REST adapter again. There it is. And this time we want to call this particular connection REST countries. And of course we're only invoking it, so invoke role is appropriate. We click create. Once again, for connection type, since they don't provide an open API URL, we'll use the base URL and paste in the base URL for that particular web application. All right, for security policy, this web application doesn't require any security at all, so we're going to abide by their requests and provide no security. And then we can click on test, close the banner, click on save, close that banner, and now we're in a configured state, ready to go. I'll exit out of the connection. And that's it for this practice. See you in the next video. All right, moving on now to practice 7-3. In order to create a connection to an Oracle database, we need some additional information to include the wallet. There's several ways that can be accomplished. If you have friendship with the database administrator, they can provide that wallet for you. We want to simplify things for you, and what we've done is we've staged that wallet into an object storage location where we have provided you a download URL. So if you're going to do this exercise yourself, let me talk to you here. The lab tab will have information under this pre-built instances for your lab so that you can get both the database name as well as access to that wallet. So I'm going to kind of walk you through what that looks like. Here's again a simulation of what you would see on the lab tab, and down below under public cloud instance towards the very bottom is both the database name, where you would want to make a note of that, which I will, and also this wallet download URL, which I'm going to need here. So we will use that here in just a moment, but we want to make sure that we have this saved. So notice the instructions say we want to copy and paste that link in our browser and then go ahead and save it to a location on our computer. So I'm going to do that now to show you what's involved in there. I copy that. I'll open up this in another tab, which now allows me to save this wallet. By the way, the database name is also right there in the wallet name as well. So I'm just going to save it here in my downloads folder for convenience so I can find it later. And now that that is saved, and I have the database name, we're now ready to create the connection starting here with step 2. Let me move this out of our way, and let's go do that. We click on creating a new connection. This time we're looking for the Oracle ATP adapter. I'll just type ATP. There it is. And we're supposed to give it a name of ATP demo. And for the role, for these exercises, all we needed it for is the invoke role, and we'll click Create. Now here's where the security policy must be set appropriately to associate with our wallet configuration. So we ensure that it's set to JDBC over SSL according to lab instructions, and now we need to upload that wallet that we just retrieved. So I'm going to click here on that and then navigate to my downloads directory, and there's the wallet that we just brought in. And if you're curious, you may want to look inside the wallet to see what information is there, something you might want to peruse on your own a little bit later on. So we've chosen the file, and the only thing left is that that wallet was saved and stored with a password. Now, fortunately, the lab instructions give you information as to what that password is. I'm going to paste that in. And then the lab instructions also let you know that we're going to use for credentials, we're just going to use the admin credentials, which was pretty straightforward, along with that same password. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to put in the username, which is admin username. In the real world, we wouldn't use the admin user. We'd use some schema owner user with their credentials to access the database. But for expediency, we're doing it this way. One more thing, though, we're not quite done. If you look at the lab instructions at step 15, we have an additional bit of information to configure under optional properties. While I could populate these values, the only one I really need is the service name. Now, according to the lab instructions, I need to take that name of the database and append it with an underscore TP. So I'm going to do that now. Let me get the database name. I'll copy and paste that in here that I've got saved. And I will append it with an underscore TP for transaction processing, is what it actually stands for there. And now we're ready to click on test. And fortunately, we got everything done right. So there's our confirmation, and we click to save the integration. I'm sorry, save the connection. This is not the integration. We'll close that banner, and we will close the connection, and we can see that it is now in a configured state. The lab instructions do give you information about learning more about ATP adapters. In fact, it's in our resources that you can take a look at if you want to expand more. It's called ATP Adapter Docs.pdf. We'll see you in the next video. All right, we're pressing ahead to practice 7-4, where we're going to go ahead and configure that new ATP database adapter connection, running through various steps to get the information from a specific table and a schema in that database. Let me go ahead and pull this out of the way. You can follow along with your activity guide. Step 1, we go to our integrations panel, to our retrieve country information, and we're going to open it back up for editing. So now we're ready to, within our design canvas, make a call right after we receive the trigger. And we'll use this new database connection, ATP demo. We're going to call this get code, looking for the country code. And notice here on this basic information page, we have several options here. One is to invoke a stored procedure, which we don't have. The other is to go ahead and run a SQL statement. If we had a SQL statement that we knew, we could just paste it in here and we use that option. But we're going to walk you through how it allows you kind of to build logic for performing an operation on a table. And I almost forgot, it gave me some text for a description, which I'll paste in here in our lab guide. Basically, this retrieves